The first tip I want to talk about is the overall design of your Chapter 5. This lesson strategy is still only dealing with Chapter 5. The overall design of your chapter means that if you were to look at aesthetically, if it was printed already, that you would be able to find that the paragraphs are designed in a manner that are balanced, that there's not a lot of overly short and choppy paragraphs or overly long paragraphs, that the headings are in the correct place, that the design of it is inviting, that there's this introduction, that there's then this section after section after section that provides the flow of the material in a manner that's reflective of a dissertation. One of the things I suggest is that if you haven't, make sure that you do have a template, if your university has one, for how they want to see their Chapter 5 designed. There may be specific headings that they require. Make sure that you put all those headings in as you then put in all your content. And then when you're done with your Chapter 5, go back to that template and make sure you have all the information in there. And wherever possible, try to have the information balanced again. It may not be possible because some sections do require more content than others, but if you can, look at your overall chapter aesthetically and see if it's appealing to your eye. Then there's the flow of content. Does the flow of content make sense? Did you go from an introduction to the content of the body of that chapter and then end it with a conclusion? Does the paragraph flow well with content in the sense that is there this introductory sentence to each paragraph? Does the paragraph have information in there that's pertinent to the content of that heading? Is there a closure to that paragraph that leads to the next paragraph? Does the flow of content move in such a manner that's conducive for the academic reading eye? Will the person also who your work is designed for, perhaps that frontline supervisor, be able to understand the information in your work? Are the tables and figures, if you include them, are they positioned correctly so that it flows and it doesn't obstruct the reader's attention? Make sure that those paragraphs, again, that they're in shape in the sense that they're 3 to 7 sentences long and that the flow moves from one section to another with active voice word choices to help the reader maintain interest as they read through your work. The research method and design applied well. What we're asking for here is to make sure that as you put your work together, that you use the correct word choices for your research design that reflects well on the method and the data you collected and the recommendations and implications that you make. If you have a qualitative design, are you focusing on those lived experiences throughout your chapter and how the data was supported by the people who you actually interviewed? If it's quantitative data, does your data reflect well statistically in how your work was determined mathematically in regards to perhaps how your null hypothesis was either rejected or failed to be rejected? Take a look at the overall research design and method because, after all, you are producing a dissertation research study, and this research method and design needs to be applied well throughout your entire document. As I've been speaking about throughout the lesson strategy about higher order critical thinking, make sure that your Chapter 5 reflects the highest levels of critical thinking. After all, this is your final capstone document that you're going to produce in your doctoral dissertation program. Therefore, make sure that you have words that reflect how you analyze and evaluate the data, how you infer from the data to the recommendations and conclusions. If you're not sure, take a look at what are the verbs associated with Bloom's cognitive taxonomy and what are higher order critical thinking skills. Then use the verbs that align well with synthesizing, evaluating, and analyzing, more so than understanding and knowledge on the order of higher order critical thinking. Oftentimes, by just replacing the verbs and how you refer to your data or the citations of others can help improve your work dramatically to bring out a higher level of critical thinking to be reflected in your work. We need to make sure that your work aligns with the university's quality expectations. And you may not know this, but oftentimes the university puts out information how they want things put together in their chapters through a template perhaps. Or what I suggest here, as I'll suggest later as well, in some areas, is to go and download a couple dissertations that were recently published by your university. Chances are those qualifications that you see there in those dissertations are what you can emulate and put into your work in regards to the quality, the type of content that people want, their word choices, the level of depth that people use, and how they relate to the research and the findings and the conclusions and recommendations. These are areas where you can start to build in the richness. If you've included all the content in the way that I've described throughout this lesson strategy for Chapter 5, you should have no problem getting through approvals at your university for quality expectations. One of the things that a dean has to look at beyond what faculty look at is the body of knowledge. After all, they are the guardians of the university for the degree programs. So if you happen to be in a Doctor of Health Administration or a Doctorate of Education or a Doctor of Business Administration, those degrees have their individual body of knowledge. And collectively, a university, if you look at all the dissertations in the degree field, adds to the body of knowledge. Your work needs to have some sort of implication somehow, some way that extends that body of knowledge or reinforces what's already there. The deans will look at that from an overall perspective to make sure that your work meets the minimum requirements. Chances are this is not a concern, but the best way to make sure that this is not a concern for your dean's review is to make sure that you indicate how your work contributed to the body of knowledge, whether it is to close a gap or whether it helps to bridge a gap between two different areas of theory and practice perhaps, or how you've reinforced or added to what was already in the body of knowledge in a new way that perhaps you extended studies that were there to a new location or geographical opportunity. Be sure that your work clearly suggests how it has some implications to the body of knowledge. One of the areas, as I mentioned throughout this lesson strategy, that a dean office will look for in looking at whether to approve your work or not in Chapter 5 are these recommendations. Again, don't make weak recommendations off real strong data findings. Again, as I've been indicating about realistic expectations and recommendations in your work, you want to make sure that the recommendations you make are realistic, that you're not making weak recommendations off strong data, or the opposite in the case where perhaps you had weak data and you make strong recommendations. Another area you want to look at is the realistic recommendations. You want to make sure your recommendations are based on your data. You want to make sure that they're realistic. So perhaps if you had 8 out of 12 people who you interviewed who gave you information and you ended up with a theme, that's a strong recommendation because more than half the people gave you that recommendation. Whereas if only 2 people gave you something that resulted in a minor thread being generated, that doesn't mean you want to make a strong recommendation off weak data. The same would be true mathematically for when you tested your null hypothesis to determine whether it was rejected or failed to be rejected. If your mathematical calculation suggests that it was just barely, rejected, that may mean something different than if the mathematical calculation produced a different outcome. As you look at your recommendations, put them in sense of urgency, if you will. For example, if you had 8 out of 12 people make a recommendation and that ended up being a theme in your study, and then you had another one where there was 10, put it the first one that's most priority first of the 12 recommendations, then the 10. Always look at making your recommendations in a manner that shows the most strongest recommendation first, then the next one down to the weakest one that you may put out there. This way they're in a prioritized order, and it helps to make sure that your work flows well, yet in another way. Most students and faculty are not aware of the accreditation review worthiness of a dissertation, but this is okay. But for your perspectives, and one of the things I wanted to bring to the lesson strategy here is that what a dean needs to be concerned about is how will the dissertations that he or she approves or that have been approved at the university going to stack up, if you will, or how they're going to be evaluated when the accreditation agency comes to look at the dissertations. Every few years, an accreditation agency will come into the university and look at dissertations as part of their overall review. These accreditors look at dissertations from many universities around the world. And therefore, these people want to make sure that all the dissertations meet this certain worthy category. If you've incorporated all the content and ideas that I've suggested throughout this lesson, you will not have a problem. But just be aware, oftentimes, a dean has concerns that are far beyond what a faculty member's concerns are when they're looking at your work. And oftentimes, a dean may offer a need to have more work done on your Chapter 5 because they need to make sure that the work that you produce is at its highest level. And oftentimes that may just mean that there needs to be improvement in how the data is represented or how the data is referred to in the recommendations or conclusions. Again, I believe that if you follow all the guidance and the lesson strategy that I've indicated for you, you will not have a concern. Of course, a dean needs to be sure of the APA alignment just like every other person in the system who is involved with your work, from you to the faculty members to your dissertation chair, committee members, and the dean's office. You know you need to align your work with the APA. If for some reason you cannot do this on your own, I strongly suggest you hire a tutor or an editor, or just figure out how you can maybe perhaps barter your services to get that help otherwise. There's no doubt about it. You're going to have to align your work with the APA manual as closely as possible in every little distinct way. Perhaps the difference might be is if you're at a university that doesn't use the APA and you're using the MLA or some other guideline for a format. Whatever your format alignment is, make sure that your dissertation is the best work you've ever done in that area, because after all, you're trying to get your work published so that it can be readable for many other people around the world. Survey population confidentiality protection. As you submit your work to the dean's office, keep in mind that one of the things the dean must look out for is to make sure that from an overall perspective, all the dissertations protect the confidentiality for people who are involved in that research. Much like you indicated you would, now the dean has to make one more review of your work just to make sure that there's no indication about how somebody may have otherwise been able to find their way into your dissertation with their name when it shouldn't have been in there. The appendices, that there's no direct contact information. Oftentimes, there's this contact information that's in appendices that the student didn't identify to remove or black out. This may mean your phone number. It may mean some information that reflects to the organization or somebody who signed the consent form. This may mean accidentally having in one of your appendices information that relates to somebody or the survey population themselves. You want to make sure that in your appendices there's no direct contact information that should not be there. This is just an overall perspective as the dean goes through your entire work. Now, oftentimes, while this has nothing to do with Chapter 5, it may have some of the information in the appendices I just thought was worthy of note here. Now, there's this university's trend for dissertation maturity, and this may be another challenging area for you to understand what it means, because you're a student and you don't have the wherewithal to know what the trend is for your university's dissertation maturity. But this can be minimized by making sure that you know what kind of dissertations are being approved, that you align your work to the expectations provided for you in a template perhaps, or the guidelines that have been produced for you by your university. Follow the guidelines strictly as wherever possible, but keep in mind that over the years a university matures as any organization does, and that the university's goal is to get better with all the things that they do, just like any organization or like any people do. So the idea being is that your university has this trend of dissertations, and one would think that the dissertations they're approving now are better than the dissertations in quality and rigor than were approved 2 years ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Ideally, universities strive to be able to produce dissertations that are worthy of contributing to the body of knowledge, that's worthy of contributing to saving people from the problems that they're involved with, that the research of dissertations are designed to help overcome. Again, if you look at all the information that's available to you in this lesson strategy, you'll not have any problem, because I constantly talk about adding value into your work. How can your work be more significant, substantial, and truly bring great credit upon you, your committee members, and of course your university? Those are the 12 tips for successful approval. I hope that you took good notes on there. Of course, you can always go back and replay this lesson at any time. This concludes the 12 lessons in how to write Chapter 5 of your dissertation. I hope that you found it helpful, and I hope that you found these tips will be insightful to make sure you go and develop your Chapter 5 in a manner that will help you to get approved the first time through once your dissertation is submitted to your university. As I always indicate, look at recently published dissertations with the same research method and design from your university and then emulate them wherever possible. You'll get a good sense for what the quality indicators are for your university by doing that. Of course, you should never copy anybody else's work, but there's nothing wrong with looking at it as a best practice and then decide how you can build upon that and make it even better in your own work to help extend your university's maturity in the dissertations. I wish you great success in Chapter 5 and putting it together, as I'm sure you're going to be successful. This is a great time for you. If you're listening to this lesson in this moment right now, you're nearing the end of your dissertation work. I wish you well, stay focused, and complete your work, and then celebrate with your family. Congratulations, and again, thank you for listening and being part of my Taking the B Out of ABD program. If I can do anything for you, do not hesitate to provide any questions, and I'd be happy to answer them.